Let's talk about the art fraud that is Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an average painter in her own time and over-promoted in her own time because she was a woman. Suddenly we have this market full of Artemisia Gentileschi paintings on auction and being bought by galleries. These paintings before were considered to be workshop copies from her father's studio, Orazio. Orazio Gentileschi is a far greater painter than Artemisia. Artemisia is a third-rate, mediocre workshop artist from her father's workshop. And her paintings are extremely difficult to authenticate. Only 19 paintings of her have been signed and the signatures vary. And the signature is not a proof that the artist painted the paintings. And I will explain this. Is that Orazio Gentileschi, who maybe knew Caravaggio, but was influenced by Caravaggio, painted lots of different subjects which were already painted by Caravaggio. So a subject would be the decapitation of Holofernes, which then Artemisia Gentileschi painted later, and her version of it is terrible. There is no proportions, the anatomy is all wrong, it's terrible. And so we have this painting, which has been recently acquired by a gallery in America, and it is nothing more than a workshop painting from her father's studio. I will explain a bit more here. So what happened was, you had a painting family headed by Orazio Gentileschi, and he was a first-rate Baroque painter. He was influenced by Caravaggio. He took most of his subjects from Caravaggio. He had a family of painters. He had a workshop. Artemisia Gentileschi was one of those workshop painters. So was her brother, Francesco. And there are no surviving paintings of Francesco. And yet we know Francesco collaborated with Artemisia Gentileschi in her paintings, and he was an art dealer, and he would travel around Europe selling their paintings, their family paintings. The main one was Orazio, because he was the most talented. And he was portrayed by Anthony van Dyck, who was one of the greatest artists of that time. Artemisia Gentileschi is a third-rate painter, a workshop painter, nothing more than that. And so a lot of her paintings are actually by her brother, Francesco, because none of his paintings survive. I wonder why. Because his paintings are Artemisia's paintings, or paintings which are being attributed to her, and it was known that they would collaborate with each other. Not only that, in her father's workshop you had lots of other artists in her father's workshop. This is how workshops in the past, in the Baroque period, worked. You would have the master painter, then you would have students, and the students would copy the master painter's works. This is what happened in the studio of Giuseppe de Ribera. And this is why you have lots of paintings by Giuseppe de Ribera of different qualities, because a lot of them were copies done by his workshop. But he would sign them as Giuseppe de Ribera because they had more marketing value. And also as a way of the apprentice paying for his studies underneath the master artist. It was a way that the workshop survived. And this happened with Artemisia Gentileschi because she was a woman. And because she was a woman at that time and a painter, and Orazio Gentileschi had all these contacts. So they knew all the Medici, they knew Charles I, all her paintings were collected in all the major collections. And because she it had her signature, it would cost more money because it was seen as more of a novelty that a woman had painting the paintings. And what I'm saying to you is that most of those paintings are actually poor paintings by a mediocre artist, and a lot of them are actually workshop paintings copied from her father's paintings. And not only that, a lot of her paintings were probably painted by her brother, Francesco. Because we know he was a painter too, and he was a dealer, and he would take the paintings for sale. And when they used to take paintings for sale in different courts, the paintings would get damaged, so they would have to be restored. And so Francesco would be there to restore the paintings and repaint them. It is nearly impossible to authenticate her paintings. There are only 19 surviving signatures, hardly any paperwork. Why do we have this mass promotion of Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an average painter? All her proportions are wrong, distorted, and her paintings are rip-offs of her father. Why is she being promoted now? The reason is because they want to create this idea that there was this great female artist in the Baroque period. There wasn't. And they're overrating her work. There is also a financial interest, because if a painting comes up for auction, and before it was just an anonymous workshop painting from her father's workshop, and then they can say that it's by Artemisia Gentileschi, suddenly you have a painting which was worth £2,000, which is worth now £2 million. So there's a financial interest. There's a political interest, as they're trying to promote this idea that women are the equal of men in every single field, including things like football and boxing. And so they have invented this figure, Artemisia Gentileschi. who, as I say, was an average painter for her times. She was not terrible, but she was not great either. All her proportions are wrong. And most of her paintings are actually paintings from her father's workshop. And they are also paintings by her brother. And her paintings are almost impossible to authenticate. Yet all of these paintings are appearing on the market. It is impossible, and it is a scam. So we can see that her signatures differ. A signature is not a proof of authenticity. As I've said, painters like Rembrandt and Ribera used to sign their students' works because this would, and Rubens as well, because this would give them more income. Even though the collectors would secretly know that this was not by the master's hand, but it would elevate the price. And this was a way of keeping the workshop going. And this is what's happened to Artemisia Gentileschi, who was a very average painter. And most of her themes actually come from Caravaggio, because her father took all of his themes, and he was a first-rate painter. He wasn't as good as Caravaggio, he wasn't as good as Van Dyck, he wasn't as good as Ribera. But he took his subjects matter from Caravaggio, and then we have this subjects of Mary Magdalene, Holofernes in Gentileschi's painting, Artemisia, but they all come from her father, who got them from Caravaggio, who was a male painter. This has been completely distorted. And the story is that she becomes this feminist icon. Remember, her work in her own time was very well collected. She knew all the top people. It was overpriced in her own time because she was a woman. This idea that women artists have been put down is a complete myth. It is a lie. They have actually been over-promoted. And it has nothing to do with being a woman in the past. Everything had to do with class in the past. Aristocratic women were taught to paint in the court. But it was not seen as a noble profession. Painting was not seen as something noble as a profession. It was seen as an interest for the upper classes. And some of them did actually pursue that interest and become female painters. And some of them were okay. They were okay. Okay? But none of them were great. The greatest female artist is probably Kathy Kollwitz, who came later. The most talented. And what they're trying to do is create this narrative that women have been repressed throughout the whole of history of painting. It's a complete lie. And in the 1900s and 20th century, most art classes are full of women. If you go to an art class today, it's full of women. There's hardly any men. And most of those men, a few of them are heterosexual. So most of them are actually gay. Most of the guys in the art class. You'll have a few heterosexual males in there. But the majority of students will be women. And this was the same 100 years ago and even 200 years ago. And it had nothing to do with them being forbidden to draw the male out of sexism. It was a prudish society. And in the Baroque period, when Artemisia painted, her patrons had these kind of woke ideas. They actually had these kind of woke ideas in the aristocracy. So they promoted women. It was seen as something special if it was a female painter. And hence why they collected her paintings, and because of her father's connection. And also, because it was seen that it was done by a woman, it would fetch a higher price. And therefore, we cannot take any of her paintings, her signatures, seriously. And the paintings we do have by her, which are probably by her, are third-rate Baroque paintings, average paintings. They are far greater paintings by men. Valentine de Boulogne, who was the greatest French painter of the Baroque, not Poussin. But we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of male painters in the Baroque period who were far greater than her. She was a mediocre painter. And she had 5 kids, showing you that she did not even have the time to paint. And that a lot of her paintings were actually collaborations with other artists from the Orazio's workshop, and partly painted by her brother. So here is Orazio Gentileschi. You can see his paintings. They're much better drawn, much better designed. He was a first-rate painter of that time, but he was not as good as Caravaggio. His paintings are kind of safe, influenced by Guido Reni. So if we look at these 2 paintings by Artemisia Gentileschi, we can see how poorly, look at the head size compared to the arms. It's tiny, it's terrible. The anatomy is appalling. Now, you did have mannerism in this time, and it still lingered on into the Baroque period. So we have painters like Ribera who exaggerated the limbs. We have people like El Greco who exaggerated the limbs, but they kind of did it on purpose. It's as part of the spirituality of the painting. But this is just simply bad painting. Bad proportions and weakly painted. It is terrible. And they're trying to sell you that this is great Baroque painting. It is a joke. And I'm fed up of critics like this. These 2 critics, Waldy and Bendy, the Don Quixote and Sancho Panza of art gatekeepers, of art news and criticism. With Waldy here promoting Tracy Emin, who is another complete average artist. At least Artemisia Gentileschi could paint to a decent standard, unlike Tracy Emin. And so we have here Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and they are part of this agenda to promote female artists. And the thing is, okay, that's fine in the present day if you want to do that. But the problem is when you start looking at an artist like Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an average painter, and putting her on the status of painters like Van Dyck and even her father, who was a far greater painter than her. So if we look at Caravaggio's painting of Holy Furnace, we find that it is much more robust, much better painted, and it's much more lifelike, and the proportions work more. The whole picture works. It's not an isolated painting of parts which do not integrate with each other as a whole. Caravaggio was a true master of that time. And we have to remember that workshop artists would get raped. Male workshop artists would get raped. This happened in the workshop of Bernini. You also have young boys who were partners of artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Caravaggio. This happened in workshops. And Artemisia Gentileschi was raped by one of her father's painting collaborators. But the thing about her, this is by Caravaggio, but the thing about her is that she was able to get some sort of justice in her case because she came from such a high privileged position. This was a privileged female who had a privileged life at that time. It has nothing to do with that she was a woman. Painting in the past was mainly male painters who were born in kind of the middle class or upper middle class, and their paintings were for the aristocracy. And the aristocracy actually had these kind of woke liberal ideas as we see today, because the Medici family were the biggest collectors of Kabbalistic books and Kabbalistic ideas of the woman being equal to the man, and then we have this agenda of transhumanism today, is all part of this structure. And so the patrons of Artemisia Gentileschi and the patrons in the past, the wealthy who actually commissioned paintings, were very woke for that time, unlike the peasants. It is only in the 20th century, really, that the lowest classes of people, like myself, have been able to pick up a brush. True working class people from working class backgrounds. So her signatures are completely inconsistent, and she was an average painter, not a great painter. Her paintings are appalling. They are mediocre, poor anatomy, poor design, poor colouring, and a lot of her paintings, which have been attributed to her, are from her father's workshop, Orazio Gentileschi's workshop, and a lot of her paintings were actually painted by her brother, who collaborated in painting her paintings, Francisco Gentileschi, who in the modern day, none of his paintings survive. And there's a reason why. Because his paintings have been attributed to Artemisia Gentileschi. Thank you. Don't believe in this art fraud. As I say, it's there to promote this idea that there was this great feminist painter in the Baroque period. It's nonsense. And it's also to sell paintings, mediocre workshop paintings, for millions and millions of pounds. Thank you.